Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I am your host. My name is Daphne Royce. I am a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Filoli Historic House and Garden is located in Woodside, approximately 25 miles south of San Francisco. Covers over 650 acres of land overlooking Crystal Spring Reservoir and the Santa Cruz Mountains. The grounds include a 54,000 square foot mansion surrounded by magnificent gardens, orchards, and natural lands with distinct ecosystems, including a trail. Filoli is considered to be one of the finest remaining country estates of the 20th century. They offer visitors numerous activities and programs throughout the year and have even been used as the home in many Hollywood films. I have Jean Salyars here, who is a horticulturalist and will tell us more about Filoli. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you, Daphne. Happy to be here.
Would you tell us a little bit about you and what is a horticulturalist?
Yeah. My name is Jim Salyars. I'm the director of horticulture at Filoli. So I oversee the entire horticulturist team, which is 15 of us in total, who work in the gardens and the greenhouses. I came to Filoli 26 years ago as one of the horticulturists who worked in one of the sections, the sunken garden section of the garden. And then for a number of years I worked in the greenhouses as the greenhouse manager. And then since 2014 I've been the director of horticulture. And I first visited Filoli. I'll just tell this little story. I first visited Filoli only 6 months before I started working here. And I came on a very rainy day. There were very few guests. The spring display, it was in April of 1995 and 1994, and the spring display was kind of waning, so it wasn't a great experience for me as my first time visit. But then I was wrapping up my master's degree and was looking to find a job in the Bay Area, and I saw a opening for a position here, and I applied just to go through the interview process. And but when I fortunately was offered an interview, and I came out, and when I learned about the work that was happening here and learned more about the history of the garden, I was just overwhelmed and wanted the job so bad. So flash forward 26 years later, I now oversee the department and the team of horticulturists. And a horticulturist is someone who cares for plants. And it's kind of a broad term that it can include gardens. So someone who works in a garden, sometimes you call someone who works in a garden a gardener, but really they're a horticulturist. They're caring for and keeping alive the plants and having those plants thrive. But other branches under horticulture include viticulture, so people who take care of grapevines or table grapevines, or people who take care of fruit trees, orchards, are horticulturists. So it's everything from all the different edible crops that we grow, those people are horticulturists, to more garden type horticulturists who take care of plants that flower and are grown for their beautiful flowers as well. So it's a pretty broad field, and I actually went to UC Davis, where horticulture has always been an important part of the programs that they offer, and they have people who study orchard crops and grape crops and different aspects. And within horticulture, it can be gardens, but it can also be floriculture. So people who grow cut flowers for arranging roses and chrysanthemums and Gerbera daisies and all those different things you think of when you go to the florist to buy. That is also an aspect of horticulture where people are growing flowers for people to enjoy. So,
could you tell us about different part of the gardens, orchards, like you mentioned earlier, and anything else in Filoli?
Yeah. So the garden is considered 16 acres of formal gardens. So that is kind of the main spaces that people visit. And the house here is, as you mentioned, is a 54,000 square foot mansion. And it now is kind of lies on the edge of the garden. We're hoping actually to eventually make it more the center of the experience when people come here, but that's for the future, some of the planning that we're doing. But the gardens were laid out mostly south of the house, so we're actually sitting on the southernmost edge of the garden. And this garden had various people who were part of the design. The kind of grander scheme started with Willis Polk, who designed the mansion, and then Arthur Brown of Blakewell and Brown, who's the team who did City Hall in San Francisco, the Opera House in San Francisco, Hoover Tower at Stanford. Many important kind of early 20th century buildings were designed by Blakewell and Brown. Arthur Brown, along with Bruce Porter, who was kind of a Renaissance man artist who was connected to the Bourne family who built Filoli, and they laid out kind of the more intimate spaces within the greater garden, and worked with Isabella Warren, who was an important early 20th century plants woman, also a florist, a party planner, but she helped with a lot of the color scheme throughout the garden. And she actually worked later with the Roth family, who bought the estate from the Bourne family after Mr. and Mrs. Bourne passed away. So they were kind of the artist team who designed the garden. And the garden is built on two long axes. We're actually sitting toward the end of the longest axis in the garden, which runs from the north side of the house all the way to the high place, where we're just below. We're just sitting just down below the high place. And it's a 1,730 foot long axis through the garden. There are other axes to the east and west of us. And then breaking up those different axes are walls or hedges or pathways that create the different what we call garden rooms. Other people call them that too. It's kind of a design name for kind of a distinct section of a garden that has kind of a room-like feel. So that is how the garden is broken up, and so we have names for all those different sections, and there are historic names. There are names that we use today because they make more sense to the guests when they're kind of navigating this big garden. So within those rooms, there are different plants. So I mentioned the sunken garden earlier. That was the section that I was in when I first started. And the sunken is what we call the living room of the garden, because it's the most highly designed and highly the number of plants that make up the display in that section of the garden are usually it's the biggest number of plants. But it's also sunken in the ground. Part of that sinking feature is based on hedges that surround it that give it kind of a low feel to it. So the sunken is one of the garden rooms, but we have the cutting garden, and we have a Shark Cathedral garden, which is based on a stained glass. Bruce Porter, who I mentioned earlier, was a stained glass artist, and he in the planning of this garden, somewhere along the line there was a conversation about doing a stained glass garden. So we have a section of the garden that is based on a stained glass window at Shark Cathedral outside of Paris. So there are hedges that make up what would be the lead of a stained glass window, and then the different plants that we plant between the hedges are the color of the different glass in the stained glass window. So a number of garden rooms throughout the garden, and that's kind of one of the beautiful things about Filoli. Is you walk through, you kind of pass through one section, and then the next section is revealed, and you get to see another beautiful section of the garden and study it. That's one of the things that I've always loved about Filoli. Is I've visited, a handful of the bigger grand estates like Versailles and some of the English country estates and things like that, and they're on a scale that just, for most people, just blows their mind. They would have no idea how to take care of that. But when you walk through this garden, overall it's a giant garden, but each of these rooms is something that would fit in most people's, if they have a normal sized backyard, it would fit in that backyard. And so you can kind of wrap your head around each room as you walk through. The other important component of this garden are the orchards. And we have a almost 7-acre orchard down on the lower section of the property, which is down below where the parking lot is today. And then we're surrounded by fruit trees here. There are down this whole line what we call the ULA. These are the U trees next to us. I don't know if you can see them just behind us. Are espalier fruit trees. So they're fruit trees that are trained onto a post and wire system. So they're kind of this beautiful fan of a fruit tree trained on this post and wire system. But on either side of us there are more fruit trees. And fruit is the biggest collection of any type of fruit plant we have here at Filoli. We have probably 600 varieties of fruit in the garden. And probably 800 to 900 trees total. So we have apples and pears are the predominant varieties, but we also have peaches and plums and unusual fruits called like medlar, and we have table grapes. So, and we have citrus. So this really can pretty much most of the fruits that you think of, for most people and beyond are the varieties that we have. So this incredible fruit collection is also an important aspect, and that is what the Bourne family wanted to create. They wanted to create a farm, a country place estate that was also had production and grew fruits and vegetables and cut flowers for them to use for entertaining and for just living. And fruit would be packed up during those days, and when they traveled to their other houses, they would take fruit, or fruit would be shipped to their other houses so that they could enjoy it when they weren't on site. So yeah, and it's an incredible collection of fruits and plants in general here at Filoli.
I understand Bourne and Ross families owned this estate for about 60 years.
Yeah.
And before Mrs. Ross donated property, I heard that the orchard wasn't taken care of at that time. So you guys had to rebuild them back to today.
Yeah, that was the fruit trees in most of this part of the what we call the formal garden continue to be maintained pretty well. But that 7-acre orchard was not important to them. They only had they had endless resources, but they wanted to devote the resources to the garden. And so not to any fault of theirs, but it just wasn't, they fortunately bought this estate and saved this property, and later donated this property. So there are things that the Roths did that were life-changing for this garden, and but the orchards were just not something that they cared as much about, and so they just let the orchard kind of do its own thing, and there were fences, but the fences started to come down over the years. So there's an incredible deer population here, and the deer went in, and fruit tree leaves are like candy to deer, and so they ate a lot of the trees, but they also didn't irrigate. And so it wasn't until 1996 that that orchard was just left on its own. And so we wanted to bring back that collection, and we wanted to be able to celebrate that collection down there. And so the board gave money to the horticulture department to clear out what was originally the fence line. It had just become overgrown with oak trees and poison oak and things like that. So that was cleared out, and a fence was put around the orchard to protect it from deer getting in, and then an irrigation system was put in. And at that time, there were about 150 of the original trees. So there were trees that survived. No care, no supplemental irrigation of any kind, and did great. And we've lost a handful of those trees since then, but we still have about 100 trees, 105 trees down there that still survive. So then we embarked on filling in all of the open spots that where trees had been lost over the years, and now have rebuilt it. It's still a work in progress. There are conditions down there that make it challenging for trees. So there are some very wet spots. There are some spots where the soil is not great for growing. So it's like I said, it's a work in progress, and we're hopefully we've kind of identified some things that we can do to make it better growing conditions. Replacing some of the dwarf varieties. Fruit trees can be grafted onto different types of roots so that they can be kept small, medium, or full size. And we're realizing that we really should have them on regular rootstocks so that they become full-size trees. So that's something that's in progress now. But we've really brought it back, and now there are over 600 trees down there. And it's a beautiful. When we open it up during the month of October for Orchard Days, every weekend the orchard is open. Just as part of your regular visitation, you can come and walk through the orchard, see the fruit trees. It's really beautiful in fall. Sometimes there'll be a little bit of fall color starting. It's really lovely to walk through an orchard of trees. Most of the fruit has been picked by then, but one thing that we do is we leave our grape collection, and people can graze the different grape varieties that we have and taste all the different grapes. So that really enhances the visit for a lot of people, especially families. The kids are really excited about the grapes and getting to taste those. So yeah, the orchard has in the last 25 years become more and more an important part of this estate again, which has been great.
So when they started to construct and design this entire estate, are all the trees and orchards or any part of a vegetation, are they actually native in California?
They are, yeah. So this was a completely native oak woodland landscape. For the most part, there were some natural meadows on the land. Filoli sits about, I can never remember the number, about a quarter mile or less, depending on where you are, from the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault runs through the property. And if you are at the garden and have a view to the west, where the mountain starts to rise, that's the San Andreas Fault. And so because of the fault, there are ecosystems on the property that were beyond the oak woodland. There were some meadows, natural meadows as well. But on this property total, we have oak woodland that was kind of down here where the garden was built, but we have redwood forest, and we have Douglas fir forest, and we have chaparral, which is another plant community that is on this property. So it was it was a native landscape, but when the house was built and when they were considering the layout of the garden, some trees were kept. So there are oaks in and around the garden that have been here over 100 years, since before the time that the Bournes built the property. And we continue to add oaks to replace some of the older trees. Sometimes we add something nearby so that when the original tree goes, we still have that component. They are part of what gives this landscape its unique look, is having the native trees that are in and around the garden. For some people, it's one of the highlights of the visit to see the giant oaks that are north of the mansion, just north of the mansion, but other oak trees that we have. Within the garden beyond that, we have what we now call the Woodland Garden, which is adjacent to the Woodland Garden Court, which was originally the tennis court. And that originally was a wild garden, and a wild garden is a garden that is made up of the plants native to that area. But when Mrs. Roth lived here, she loved camellias, and she loved rhododendrons, and she loved dogwoods, and so those trees and shrubs were added to that section. So now it's more of a woodland. There are still a number of other native plants in the woodland, but it's predominantly plants that are exotic to the state.
Would you kind of describe a little bit about natural lands and the ecosystems?
Yeah. So I think we have 7 distinct ecosystems. So I talked about the oak woodlands. the redwood forest, we have the meadow areas, we have some riparian, some wet areas. We have a lot of natural creeks that run through the property, so those are wetter areas. We have the chaparral that I mentioned. I'm forgetting one, but those are the different ones. And you can see, you can either be in or see a number of those on the estate trail when you walk through. So you walk along the edge of the meadow, you walk through the oak forest, you walk through a grove of redwood trees, a native grove of redwood trees. You are near some of the wetter areas. You can see the chaparral, but none of it goes through any of the chaparral. So with those, I think that is part of what, you can hear birds in the background now. It's not just this garden and the flowers and the irrigation, the water in the garden that attract wildlife. It's also that we're surrounded by native lands, and birds and other animals have lived in this area in and around this garden for millennia. And so we have sparrows singing, and we have all the wildlife that lives in the Bay Area, from mountain lions and coyotes and bobcats and foxes. The higher predators are on the property, and we see evidence of sometimes daily. But we have all the birds and squirrels and raccoons and skunks and possums. So we have all of that, and that is important for us because, and we're also, at the very beginning you talked about us being adjacent to Crystal Springs Reservoir. This land and those streams that I mentioned all run off into Crystal Springs Reservoir. So over the years we have really made more and more of an effort to do things organically, sustainably, and do all that we can to protect this watershed, but also that helps to create better living conditions for all the animals and birds here too.
I understand when Mr. and Mrs. Bourne, when they designed this property and they want to be sustainable, so they will be able to have all the foods coming from the garden and the orchard, maybe the water from the reservoir and the wells. They can lodge in the wood from the redwood trees. Is that still part of a goal for the garden today? Yeah,
well, we definitely, in the interpretation that we do, we tell those stories a lot. We're actually so definitely with the orchards, bringing back the orchard. We try to do that not only because it was an historic component of the estate, and we want to bring that back for people to enjoy, but also for the production, so that we can make apple butter and pear butter, and we can make hard cider, and we can make other products that we can offer to the guests. So that's those are some of the reasons we're doing that. We're also right now in the midst of reopening or opening our historic vegetable garden. There's a vegetable garden that was part of this upper production part of the garden. Historically, it was where vegetables were grown for the Bourne and the Roth family. The last 40 years, it has been mostly offline in terms of guests being able to see it, although we have opened it up for programs and classes and things like that. But we're working toward opening it up in the next month. So hopefully sometime this summer of 2022, the vegetable garden will open up, and we can start growing things. So when it was offline, it was a staff cooperative vegetable garden. So staff were using it to grow vegetables. It would be shared amongst the staff. But now we want to put that produce into products that we can create for guests to take home, like tomato jam or a chutney or a salsa or something like that, but also create or offer vegetables to the company who runs our cafe, so that people can daily be eating things that come from the estate. And with the fruit historically, and with any vegetables that we have that are excess, the idea is anything that's extra we offer to food banks for folks to have it who are in need. So that will continue as well with the vegetables. So yeah, then the Bournes also, they kept sheep and cows and chickens and rabbits. So they really did want to live off this land. We don't have a lot of history in terms of how much they were able to, but I think that it definitely supplemented a lot of what they needed for regular meals. My guess is that they probably used those products as much as they could when they were entertaining, so they could share that bounty with their guests. But water was also, and continues to be, an important component of this estate. And originally, the Bournes built a reservoir kind of up the mountain a little ways, and soon learned that was not going to be enough water for them for this size of estate. One of the things that the Bournes did that was really smart was that they built this garden based on what they thought the water that they could harvest from this land would be able to sustain. So and that resulted in this garden that is on the smaller side of some of the estates that you see around the world, but it was sustainable in that they were mindful of what they could actually keep going well. Not long after they built the reservoir and started living with that quantity of water, they realized that it wasn't enough, and so they had wells dug on the property. I think originally there were 33 wells that were dug. At one point they had 5 functioning wells. We still today have 3 functioning wells, although we're looking at doing some more exploration of places that we can harvest more water from the land. And then during the Bournes lived pretty well with what they were able to produce in terms of water. As the garden grew, I don't know how the Roths decided to allocate their use of water, but they needed more water, and so they were able to bring water over from Crystal Springs Reservoir as well. And so that continues to be where we get our domestic water, our potable water for people to drink, and it's what is in the restrooms. But we still have a quantity of well water that we harvest as long as we can each year to irrigate the landscape. So that's really good. But yeah, the Bournes really did build this place so that it could be something that they could live from as best they could. I don't think it necessarily was it wasn't that idea for the Roths, but for the Bournes it was the driving force for building this place, and how they designed it was wanting to be able to live off of it as best they could.
You have been on this estate for 26 years. Have you seen any impact by the global warming or the drought?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've been here through at least 3 drought cycles, and the drought, and there have been more before I came, and originally this whole garden was irrigated with little sprinklers. They're called a fan head that was put on this, what we call a watering horse, and those were moved all around the garden. There were dozens of them, and it would take the horticulturists in the summer 2 full days each week to water the entire garden. So a lot of human effort, but also wasteful, because it doesn't have the you don't have the ability to monitor the water in the way that you can with a regular irrigation system. And so in the 90s, 80s and 90s, a full-blown irrigation system was put in, and we can be much more conservative in the water that we put down. And that started when we had the droughts. There were droughts in the 1970s that inspired Filoli to eventually put in the irrigation system. These days, we had a cycle of droughts around 2014, 15, 16, and with those, we actually turned some of the irrigation off on some of the lawns. We cut back on a lot of the woody plantings, so fruit trees and shrubs and things like that. We cut down on the irrigation, and then we also did a test of drought-tolerant grass varieties for lawns. And so actually this lawn that we're sitting amongst is a variety called No Mo Fescue, and this was the winner from the 14 different varieties that we trialed. It uses 30% less water than typical turf varieties. It has some downsides. It doesn't take a lot of traffic, but it takes some traffic. But it's a beautiful kind of lush, flowing lawn that you let grow a little bit taller, and then you only have to mow it every 4 to 6 weeks as well. So in terms of maintenance, it's a lot less work. So this was one of our great outcomes of the last drought. This previous drought, we cut back where we could. But water is always, I've told stories already about some of the interesting history about water here. We're near Crystal Spring Reservoir. There's a lot. Mr. Bourne was president of the Spring Valley Water Company, and so water is kind of deep in the history of Filoli. So this summer we're telling a story called Blue Gold: The Power and Privilege of Water. And it's an interpretive display that talks about the history of water from the native people who lived here originally to the Spanish rancheros that were on this land, to the Bourne family and the Raw family, and today, and all the history of water there. And with this exhibit also in the garden, we're really focusing on drought-tolerant plants. So the sunken garden, which I've talked about a couple times, will be planted in succulents and plants that come from the Mediterranean or the drier regions of the world. So they're used to a summer with no water, and so they use very little water compared to apple trees and some of the other things around the garden. So we're really focusing on that. That display, telling the story of what people can do in terms of water conserving. But your original question was about global warming and what I've seen, and what sparked that me remembering that was we're sitting amongst some of the plants that are most impacted by global warming, including the fruit trees, which I've talked about. Fruit trees are a type of plant. All plants, well, not all plants, but the majority of plants need a certain amount of cold temperatures in the wintertime, and in order for them to flower and produce fruit. And the impact of global warming is that there are some varieties that, let's say, they need 800 hours of below 40 degrees each winter in order for them to be able to flower. If we're only getting 600 hours because the earth is warmer and not producing, we're not having the cold days that we should or we did historically, then they're not going to flower well, eventually may die. We also have lilacs and peonies, which are plants that need extra cool winters. So I'm definitely seeing those plants flowering later because they don't get their cold until later. I was actually looking back at some history we have on our tree peony collection, a different group of plants related to the cut flower peonies, and it was a letter that my predecessor wrote to the American Peony Society about the peonies being in full bloom in the tree. Both the tree peonies and the herbaceous peonies were in full bloom in mid-April. Or the herbaceous were just starting. The tree peonies were in full bloom, and we're now probably a month earlier. This way, a month earlier than those dates now. So this was a letter written in the late 80s, and now 30 plus years later, we're a month later. So global warming is impacting things, and I wish we had more of those nuggets of history, and maybe we do in our archives, but it's something that I hope to do is take more of these notes about when things are blooming each year so that we can start tracking how things are changing moving forward. So yeah, global warming is definitely a concern. Water conservation is a concern. We're looking at other types of plants that we can use to replace plants within the garden that don't need as much water in the future. but still provide the same elements in terms of their design. So the yew trees are an example. We're looking at potentially replacing in places our hedges, our boxwood hedges require a lot of water, and there are things that you can grow that you can hedge into long lines of boxes that are much more water conserving.
Can you tell us about the programs and activities that the estate offers to the public?
Yeah. So there are a lot. It's kind of out of my wheelhouse a little bit, but I'll in this, we try to have an overriding theme for each season or seasons, like the blue gold, for the summer and the fall. So our seasons are winter, spring, summer, fall usually, and then holidays. And within each of those seasons, there are a number of offerings. We're still kind of coming back from COVID in terms of programs and what we can offer, because some of the programs it requires you going into an indoor space, and so we're really broadening what we can do in terms of using the garden. So the orchard days, which I mentioned earlier, just kind of jumping into fall, is an example of something that we learned from COVID. We used to do a much more indoor fruit-focused event, and now we have orchard days where the orchard is open, it's safe, you can walk around with your family. It's maybe not as an intensive event, but that was what we did was a one-day fall festival, and now we have, actually from the last weekend in September through the end of October, every weekend the orchard's open. So there are many more, it's created many more opportunities, and so allows a lot more people to attend and to enjoy the orchard. But winter, we usually do have a ballroom series, which is art focused. So performing arts of different kinds happen in the winter. We celebrate Lunar New Year each year in some way in winter. We'll have some kind of a plant exhibit in winter. We've done orchids and we've done bonsai, although now this year we've moved bonsai to the spring, and we have bonsai happening in the spring of this year. During summer, we have our summer nights. So every Thursday the garden is open until 8 p.m. So it offers people an opportunity to get to see the garden in the evening light. It's really beautiful. Any opportunity you have to come and see Filoli, after 5 o'clock, as the sun is getting low, the light changes. It's really beautiful. And then fall, I talked about orchard days is kind of the highlight, but there are other programs on the season. And then holidays is actually becoming one of our biggest seasons of the year. Spring traditionally was when we had the biggest visitation for a season. It's now becoming holidays. So holidays begins the weekend before Thanksgiving, and this year will run through the first week in January. And holidays is becoming much more of an outdoor event with lights. And so this year we're upping our light display game hugely. There are all kinds of things that are new this year for holidays, and should really make for a wonderful season for people. We also decorate the house and other parts of the grounds, so that there are vignettes and displays and things that you can see throughout the grounds. But the nights and the lights are definitely where we put a lot of our focus for the holiday season. And there are Santa weekends where kids can come and see Santa, and it's becoming like the old iterations of what we did in the holidays. It's becoming a tradition, but it's becoming a tradition for many more people, many more families. It's much more family focused, and a wonderful way to share something in your community with family who comes from out of town. But so we have families who come 2-3 times during holidays, when different families come for Thanksgiving or during Christmas or other holidays that people celebrate during the holiday season, and share Filoli, but they'll sometimes come on their own. So it's great that we're open much longer, and there are many more opportunities. But it's I'll put in a plug for membership because there are only a certain number of tickets that we offer to non-members, and the nights last year, by the time we opened, I don't know, let's say there were 50,000 tickets available for the night times. I think we had fewer than 10,000 tickets by the time we opened the first day for holidays. So nighttime tickets go fast because people have really learned that it's a great experience, even in the rain. You'll come here some nights and it's raining, and it's a different light. Things kind of glow in a different way when it's raining. So it's a great experience, rain or shine, or rain or moonlight, depending on when you come.
Well, there's no bad weather in California.
That's right. I know. We're such wimps here.
And this is the grounds for all generations.
Yeah.
Any age
Exactly.
that they can come visit.
Yeah.
So what do you recommend if somebody, like first-time visitor with a very limited time?
Yeah.
Where they should go see?
I would say if you have an hour, I think just kind of hit I'm a horticulturist. I love the garden, so I think you hit the core of the garden and see the displays in the garden. But I also love the house very much. So if you have an hour and a half, you really could see the house probably in a half an hour. So hour and a half, spend more of the time in the garden, but you also will have time to visit the house. There's usually more interpretive information there, and you can learn more about the history when you go through the house. If you have 2 hours, you can spend a little bit more time in the garden, a little bit more time in the house. If you have 3 hours, then you can also walk the estate trail, which is a mile-long loop on the grounds, and see the natural areas, which is a really wonderful addition to a visit. But we have people who will come for 4 or 5 hours and will take a break and go have lunch in the cafe, or they may bring a picnic. We have picnic tables down near the parking lot, and so you can have a picnic if you want, or you can visit the cafe and then go back and walk things again. I love walking the garden in different directions, so you can do that on a visit, or just do your loop. But one of the beauties of membership is you can come back every day, every week, every month, and we definitely have members who come weekly just to see, because this garden is always changing. There are always things in bloom, and it changes weekly. Things kind of come up and then have their peak, and then something else is coming. But with the collection that we have here of plants, the camellias that I mentioned, camellias kind of span the whole winter season. We have other things that bloom in the winter, so there's always things that are blooming here whenever you come, which is great. So you should never, hopefully, have a bad visit here and not see some display. There are definitely some times where there's less flowers, but there are always some flowers that you can see. But spring and kind of midsummer are kind of the high peaks of bloom time for us.
You're encouraging me to come during the winter in the rain,
Yeah,
so that's probably in my next agenda.
Good.
Well, thank you so much, Jen.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate
My
all
pleasure.
very informative information.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
you,
you so
Daphne.
much. That's it.
Good.